For some drivers, the driver and passenger airbags may turn out to be the most important feature of their Concorde, Intrepid, or Vision. That's why it's essential that the system work properly when it's needed and be repaired properly after it has done its job. Welcome to this month's Mastertech. If you're a regular viewer, you probably recall the restraint system program on the Concorde, Intrepid, and Vision. That program was released last July and covered the operation of the dual airbag system, diagnostics, and driver's side airbag module service. The July program can familiarize you with these areas if you're new to airbag service or you need to review. In this program, we're going to concentrate on passenger side airbag module replacement and instrument panel service after airbag deployment. More specifically, we'll first be covering knee bolster and upper instrument panel removal. Then we'll look at upper instrument panel disassembly and installing new or undamaged components on the replacement upper instrument panel. Finally, we'll discuss some things you'll need to be aware of when reinstalling instrument panel components. Along the way, we'll try to make you aware of special procedures or steps that help ensure a quality repair. The first step in any airbag service is to isolate the negative battery cable. Before you do, be sure to note the radio stations which have been programmed and any other battery-dependent settings, so you can reset them before returning the vehicle to the customer. After isolating the negative cable from the battery, wait 2 minutes before beginning any airbag service. Why the wait? Well, you may remember that airbag system diagnostic modules contain energy storage devices to deploy the airbag in case the battery connections are severed. You need to wait for these to discharge. Following airbag deployment, a vehicle may contain a small amount of powder. Since this powder may irritate the skin, eyes, nose, or throat, wear a long-sleeve shirt, rubber gloves, and eye protection during initial cleanup. If your skin does become irritated during cleanup, run cool water over the affected area. If you experience nasal or throat irritation, exit the vehicle for fresh air until the irritation ceases. If the irritation continues, see your doctor. To begin the cleanup, roll the passenger side airbag into the instrument panel. Then, tape the airbag door closed. Then comes removal of the driver's side module. The procedures for removing and replacing this module and servicing related components were covered in the July 1992 program. Next, vacuum the interior of the car thoroughly. Be sure to vacuum the heater and air conditioning outlets as well. But what about the powder that has found its way into the heater AC unit itself? To vacuum that up, it's a good idea to briefly reconnect the battery. Run the blower on low and vacuum any powder expelled from the heating and air conditioning unit. Be sure to wait 2 minutes after again disconnecting the battery. As you probably know, passenger airbag deployment breaks open the skin on the upper instrument panel. So the upper IP must be replaced along with the passenger airbag module. And because of the force involved in airbag deployment, center distribution ducts are usually broken and must also be replaced. To gain access to these and other components that may also need to be replaced, you'll first need to remove the lower instrument panel or knee bolster. To do this, first remove the instrument panel end covers by pulling out on the covers to disengage the clips. Then loosen the door sill trim. Next, remove the attaching screws and the cowl side trim. To remove the A-pillar trim, you'll need to remove the top cover. You may be tempted to pry up the top cover with a screwdriver, but don't do it. To avoid damaging the top cover or upper IP, use a wide, thin trim stick. Work the trim stick into and along the inner edge of the top cover to disengage it from the clips. And pull the cover out and away from the upper instrument panel. Now you can remove each A-pillar trim piece, which are held in place by 3 clips. Your next step will depend on whether the car is equipped with a floor console. If it is, you'll need to remove the shifter bezel. To do this, with the gear selector in neutral, loosen the gear shift knob set screw and remove the knob. Then remove the ash receiver. After removing the screw holding the shifter bezel to the console and disengaging the clips, disconnect the electrical connectors and remove the bezel from the vehicle. On vehicles without a floor console, remove the lower center cover and the ash receiver assembly by removing 4 screws. 4 screws attach the knee bolster to the airbag collar. To remove these, open the glove box door and flex the sides inward to swing the glove box door down to the floor. Then remove the 4 screws through the opening. Some of the other knee bolster fasteners are behind the upper center and upper right bezels for the panel outlets. Both bezels are held on by clips, but the upper right bezel is also attached to the upper IP with a screw. You can remove the bezels with a small screwdriver, but you can also make a simple tool that will facilitate bezel removal. A hook tool such as the one shown here can be inserted between the instrument panel and bezels and hooked on the back edge of the bezels to pop them out. If the upper center bezel contains a traction control switch, you'll need to disconnect it at this point. Now you can begin removing the rest of the knee bolster fasteners. There are 2 bolts and 1 screw in each end cover area. 4 screws along the bolster face and 2 nuts at the center support bracket. Once the fasteners have been removed, you can pull the knee bolster away from the instrument panel and disconnect the electrical connectors. Their locations are illustrated in the reference book and listed in the service manual. And you'll need to know something about these connectors and the ones for the upper instrument panel to answer 2 of the questions in this month's quiz. We've been describing the procedure for a deployed module, but if you're replacing an undeployed module, at this point, you would simply remove the 6 module attaching screws and remove the module. As you probably recall from previous programs, to minimize the chance of injury, carry a non-deployed module with its cover pointed away from your body. Also, always set modules down with their covers pointing up. In the case of the passenger side module, you'll need a prop to ensure the module remains upright. Since our module has deployed, however, we'll remove it with the upper instrument panel, right after we try a review question. What instrument panel component is this hook tool used to remove? The answer is the upper right and upper center bezels. Using the tool will help you avoid damaging these components. The first step in upper instrument panel removal is removing the left and right silencer ducts from underneath the instrument panel. Next, remove the left outlet duct from beneath the upper instrument panel. It snaps in and out of position. The next step is to move the steering column away from the upper instrument panel. To do this, first remove the steering column shrouds and disconnect the electrical connectors. We've listed them for you in the reference book. Then slide the wiring trough retainer off of the trough and position the wiring out of the way. To reposition the column itself, loosen the 2 lower screws and remove the 2 upper nuts. Then move the seat back and lower the column to the floor. Next, you'll need to disconnect a number of electrical connectors. and remove the Body Control Module, or BCM. Don't bother to memorize the connectors. Use the illustration in the reference book or the list in the service manual instead. At this point, you can remove the upper IP fasteners. There are 2 bolts at each side, 5 bolts along the top. And 1 bolt at the center support. With the fasteners removed, have an assistant help you pull the upper instrument panel to the rear off the lower attaching studs. Then remove the instrument panel from the vehicle. In the next segment, we're going to cover the steps you'll need to take to prepare the new upper instrument panel for installation. But first, let's try a review question. True or false? To remove the upper instrument panel, it is necessary to remove the steering column from the vehicle. The answer is false. The steering column must, however, be loosened and lowered to the floor. As mentioned earlier, after an airbag has deployed, you must replace the upper instrument panel and you must install a new passenger airbag module and center distribution duct on the new upper IP. As long as they're not damaged, the rest of the components on the old upper instrument panel should be removed and reinstalled on the new upper IP. These include end brackets, switches and sensors, the cluster and message center, speakers, control modules, ducts, the wiring harness and junction block, and seals. Keep in mind that you'll need to remove such items as the snap-in nuts for the knee bolster to upper IP fasteners. Speaking of fasteners, be sure to hold on to the screws and clips removed from the upper IP. Some are special, such as this balled end screw used for attaching the junction block. The end is rounded to prevent damage to wiring. Also be sure to remove and set aside the VIN plate and the black face plates on the upper defroster ducts, as well as the center locator seal on the back of the IP. It's easy to overlook these parts during disassembly. We'll take a closer look at specific components and where they're located when we cover instrument panel buildup. At this point in the procedure, it's important to inspect all items that are going to be reused so that damaged components are not installed on the vehicle. Pay particular attention to components on the right side of the vehicle. Inspect the bezels and end cover for cracks and distortion or damage to their clips. The top cover is another item you'll need to pay particular attention to. Check it carefully for such damage as cracks or scratches. Check the underside for damage to the attaching points. Once you've disassembled the old upper IP and inspected all the components, you're ready to do the build-up on the new upper IP. We'll cover that right after this review question. True or false? The upper instrument panel and center distribution duct can be reused after airbag deployment. False. The upper instrument panel and center distribution duct, along with the airbag module, must be replaced. Before beginning upper instrument panel buildup, find a flat area to support the new panel. You don't want to scratch the new panel, so place a piece of carpet or other suitable material on the work surface. The first step in upper IP buildup is to install the end brackets. Remember the balled end screws we talked about earlier? There are 2 of these in each bracket. Next, after installing the snap-in nut into the defroster duct, position the new center distribution duct on the upper IP. To ensure a good fit, first install the screw in the upper center opening. Then the screw in the upper right opening. Then install the rest of the screws. There are 3 more along the front and 3 in the back. At this point, you can position the harness on the IP. 3 screws attach the junction block to the end bracket. And, like the bracket screws, their ends are balled off to prevent damage to wiring. When installing the wiring harness's 5 screws, to help ensure proper alignment, install the center screw first and work outward. One unusual IP feature is the self-aligning connectors next to the junction block. Simply slide them over until they lock. At this point, the upper IP should be repositioned so that wiring harness connectors can be routed through the hole near the right side speaker. This wiring is for the 3 front speakers and for the remote keyless entry module and ATC solar sensor on cars so equipped. When working with this part of the harness, take care not to let the connectors dangle because they could scratch the instrument panel pad. Next, install the speakers, as well as the keyless entry module and ATC solar sensor on cars so equipped. And connect the components to the harness. If the foam seal is not in place on the center speaker, reinstall it at this point and snap the face plates onto the defroster ducts. You can also now rivet the VIN plate onto the defroster duct surface. Be sure to use the special rivets with rosette heads when doing so. While the top is in this position, don't forget to install the top cover retainer clips and the seal on the center locator. This seal could easily be overlooked, but it isolates the interior of the car from the engine compartment. And if you forget to install it, your customer may suddenly discover a mysterious wind noise that wasn't there before. At this point, reposition the IP with its pad down and make sure there are no loose parts in the module mounting area. If you think about the power behind airbag deployment, you can figure out why. Loose parts could become projectiles and cause injury in the event of airbag deployment. 6 number 10 hex head screws hold the module in place, and these are torqued to 35 inch-pounds. Again, from this point on, it's important to make sure no parts fall into the instrument panel and lodge between the module and the airbag door. Following airbag module installation, reposition the upper IP again to gain access to the front face. Take care not to bend the bracket on the left side when repositioning the instrument panel. Next, install the 4 snap-in nuts for the knee bolster fasteners. If the car has ATC, there will be 2 additional snap-in nuts in the upper right bezel area for the in-car temperature sensor. After installing these, install the sensor. Then route the ATC connector through the hole in the panel and plug it into the sensor. Notice the foam seal next to the ATC in-car temperature sensor? If you cannot use the old seal, be sure to fabricate a new one to use in this location. If you think about the job of the in-car temperature sensor, you'll realize why the seal is important. It isolates the in-car temperature sensor from panel outlet air, which would give it false readings. Next, plug in the message center connector and install the message center in its opening. The cluster drops into its opening and is held in place by a latch at the top and 2 screws at the bottom. The headlamp switch has 2 connectors going to it. When installing the switch, to ensure a good fit, position the switch tight up against the pad and install the retaining screws. When installing the cluster bezel, the felt should be positioned between the bezel tabs and the attaching screws. You might be wondering about the purpose of the felt. It's simply to fill the gap between the bezel and instrument panel. You can complete assembly of the upper IP face by installing the headlamp switch bezel. It's held on by a clip and a screw. At this point, Position the instrument panel top down and install the right spot cooler duct. You'll need to position one end outboard and swing the other end into place. Then move the duct toward the center of the IP to snap it into place. Don't forget to install the attaching screw. You'll notice a few disconnected connectors in the wiring harness at this point. One goes to the airbag module, and to complete the upper IP buildup, you can connect it. You can connect the remaining connectors once the upper IP is in the vehicle. Some of these connect to components in the knee bolster. Now we're going to cover some things you need to be aware of when reinstalling the upper IP and the rest of the instrument panel components, right after a review question. What is the purpose of this upper instrument panel seal? The seal shown here helps ensure accurate readings by isolating the ATC in-car temperature sensor from panel outlet air. The first step in instrument panel installation is to install the built-up upper IP into the vehicle. To avoid damaging the upper instrument panel, it's a good idea to have someone help you position it in the car. The installation procedure is basically the reverse of the removal procedure we covered earlier. At this point, you may want to refer to the list of the electrical connectors in the reference book to make sure all of them are reconnected. There are a few things to be aware of when installing the remaining instrument panel components. After reinstalling the steering column, be sure to install the left and right silencer ducts before the knee bolster. Otherwise, you could end up having to remove the knee bolster. Installation of the knee bolster is, for the most part, the reverse of removal. Pay particular attention to the electrical connectors, making sure they are firmly engaged and routed properly. When installing the knee bolster fasteners, to ensure a good fit, start with the two center ones, then work your way outward. The rest of the assembly is pretty straightforward. Be aware, though, that there is a torque spec of 25 inch-pounds for the 4 knee bolster to airbag collar attaching screws. When installing the top cover, make sure you first engage the cover's 2 center clips in the upper IP. After snapping the cover in place, grasp the cover at the opening for the VIN plate and pull back on it to eliminate a gap between the cover and upper IP pad. Once the components have been installed, verify proper operation by first connecting the DRB2 scan tool to the data link connector. Then exit the vehicle and reconnect the battery. A check with the scan tool should not reveal any active faults. Also, observe the instrument panel lamp for the airbag. It should illuminate for about 6 to 8 seconds after key on. Since so many connectors were disconnected, it's wise to make a quick check of electrical system operation before returning the car to the customer. While you're at it, reset the radio stations. The sound systems booklet in the glove box will tell you how. Now let's try a final review question. Which of the following components should be installed first? The silencer ducts or the knee bolster? The answer is the silencer ducts. Make sure these are in place before installing the knee bolster. And that brings us to the end of another Mastertech. As we've seen, there's a lot to servicing the instrument panel after airbag deployment. But the proper procedures and an attention to detail can make the job a lot easier and help ensure a quality repair. We'll see you next month, when the subject will be DRB2 scan tool diagnostics and the flash EEPROM on the 42LE.
Hi, I'm Don Shane, and every Thursday I host the Service Center program on the Chrysler Dealer Network. This award-winning half-hour program is designed for the service and parts departments of your dealership. And the first 10 minutes or so, collectively known as Tech Topics, are always designed specifically for you, the Chrysler service technician. Tech Topics presents information you need to diagnose and repair vehicles quickly and accurately to improve your paycheck. Two regular segments that appear in the Tech Topics slot are Star Tech and Your Time, Your Money. Every month, Star Tech examines some of the most significant recent technical service bulletins and demonstrates the repair procedures. On occasion, Star Tech even covers topics not yet issued as TSBs. Your Time, Your Money is where Time Schedule Research responds to your questions and comments regarding labor operations. It demonstrates how procedures can be completed within the time allotted. Times have changed due to a technician's letter. And in recent months, anticipating technical questions about the new LH vehicles, Your Time, Your Money has demonstrated several new and notable service procedures for these cars. Other segments seen on Tech Topics include demonstrations of new special tools, recall repair procedures, motorsports features and updates, technical training updates about classes to improve your skills and make you more valuable, and other diagnostic tips. Tech Topics also keeps you up to date on emerging technologies that will play an important part in your career's future. One entire show was devoted to the new flexible fuel, Spirit, and Acclaim models. Viewers met the engineers and learned important safety precautions, including how flex fuel models differ from traditional fuel vehicles. Other segments examined the new B-Van natural gas vehicle and Chrysler's research into the two-stroke engine. You can find out what Tech Topics is covering each week by checking the monthly CDN program guide. A new edition of the Service Center airs every Thursday morning. It then repeats several times that day, plus the following Tuesday and Wednesday to make it easy to tune into. And of course, you can always tape it for later viewing. Tech Topics, every week on the Service Center. It's your convenient source for the latest service information you need to work quickly, effectively, and profitably.